So now properly, I would like to welcome all of you, all and each one of you, to this chapter of We Are Concerned About the Violence. It's really a true pleasure to have all your voices here. This is the second chapter of this project that basically was initiated last year under the circumstances that we are still living under. So this pandemic that is basically putting to a halt certain uses of public space, differently depending on the geographies where we find ourselves. But still, we all share this longing for being able to use it again and to meet again. And it was just not, it was not so long ago that Jaspal, you were sharing with me also this so much needed presence of people around us, right? May it be in the streets, may it be stranger faces or friend faces, but it's so clear to all of us now that even the more segregated ones, we do feel the need to have a bit of human interaction. And I guess even the ones that were tired, and many of us maybe were tired of spending so much time with so many people around, nowadays we actually long for that. So I think this is partly also what makes us human. So again, depending on when we are, this segregation might be a bit more comfortable if we are lucky enough to have our own place to stay, if we are lucky enough to be able to afford home office. But unfortunately, many of us don't. And this is a reality that, again, it's very present in all continents right now. And we tend to think, when we watch this news about COVID, we tend to think very much, at least I'm speaking from Berlin, right? So where the newspapers in general, they're most worried about how will restaurants are going to open again, or how bars are going to open again, and clubs, and how are we going to be able to use public spaces again, you know, and meet our friends and whatnot. But when we think about other geographies, the worries go way beyond that. The worries go towards people that were, for instance, migrant laborers, where many times they didn't even have a precise settlement, a place that they could call home, and their home or their homes were wherever they were moving to. So when one takes this liberty of movement as well, this becomes a whole different conversation. And so when one is forbidden to use public space for dislocating oneself from point A to point B, and therefore to work, and we take this, we take from those people also this this hypothesis to earn their daily wage and to earn their daily way of living. This is a reality that should concern all of us way more, and should concern not just politicians and economists, but also, you know, artists and social practitioners and architects and many of these voices. And this is why we are actually putting all of our voices together. So again, welcome to all of you. I would just very quickly, I would like to just read an introduction that brings us together, basically the first paragraph of our concept, which I find it interesting for those who will be listening to us. So I'll start. Throughout the 21st century, many have been concerned about the representations as uses of this multi-layered space that we tend to define as public space. Indeed, a very difficult concept to grasp in its whole. What is, though, the meaning of sculptures in public space if we focus about certain icons? What history does the name of this or that street represents? Like the changes on the naming of streets in Berlin, for instance, such as the case of Mohrenstraße, nowadays more called M-Straße, and the change of it into Anton Wilhelmstraße, for instance, is one of the examples of the worries that we are finding ourselves when thinking about the importance of the representations in public space, right? So Why are certain communities and cultures made visible in the public space as others are made invisible? What role does art have in all these spaces, and how much does it contribute to creating a sense of collective memory? Or, if we want to think about it as well in these terms, amnesia. Because if one creates spaces of memory, then one also is putting out many of the histories or symbols that do not find in the public space the space to exist. So who controls this? These are many of the questions we are basically asking ourselves. So, and how communities and underground cultures, such as hip hop, for instance, and the artistic communities in general, help in the molding and reclaiming the idea of public spaces in this local context. We believe the works in different collectives of art, such as yours, culture and social practitioners can bring many of the answers to some of these questions. So again, I welcome Márcio, Swati, Jaspal, Naky, and Manmeet as well to this conversation as voices that will certainly add much important ideas to this whole conversation. So to explain just a little bit on how this came to be, so we are concerned about the violence, as I was saying before, is basically a project that our colleague and friend Abhishek Nilember came with the idea forward to put together voices of different geographies to basically try to think together about all these topics and all this infrastructural and systemic and systemic violence that we are undoubtedly finding in the different levels of society. And then if we can't bring these conversations into a physical one by inviting each one of you to be in the same room with us, then let's connect online through this project, which is called We Are Concerned About the Violence. So would be important as well to say that this come in the framework of an artistic residency, which is the first one that we are hosting at Savvy Contemporary. This time financed and funding by the Martin Roth Initiative, which is basically an institute in Berlin that is helping. These sounds are
Savvy sounds.
weird. I don't know which ones. Okay, it's coming from our side.
The door.
So basically to say that this project of residency, a long-term residency, which is exactly the reason Manmeet is here in Berlin with us and has been for this last year, which is called the Groundwaters Are Connected. And I think it could be a name that would represent also an idea appealing to this meeting we're having here, because we truly believe the groundwaters are connected, as ideas are connected independently of geographies. And these worries on public space are as well worries that connect all of our realities. So again, welcome to every one of you. And I would like to give a bit of the word to Manmeet as well, so she could also bring up something that is indeed a part of the discussion that was very enthusiastic for all of us, which is how art, and in this particular point of view, hip hop as a subculture and part of the subculture is molding so much the linguistics, the gestures, the presence, let's call it the performance in public spaces. So Manmeet, you have the mic.
Thank you, Antonio, for this nice detailed introduction of how the groundwaters are connected also through different projects that we are all a part of, and yet something connects us at this time. So I feel the warmth of it, and I'm also honored to be completing this residency with this talk show, which we are consisting. And the ideas that I felt during lockdown here in Berlin applicable in a public space kind of were an influence of what I've seen in Berlin before. So also to notice is the change that we feel in this year about our interactions in public. So for me in hip hop, as much as I could experience having ciphers with other poets, or attend a protest and be able to perform in the form of a short, alarm given in a collective sense, yet on with or without a mic. This is really something I want to I want to explore in all our presence. That how do we share our concern in a public space at this time as artists, and what are the ways which could surpass any law that could halt or censor the freedom of speech, and what mediums can we use, and how do we actually accomplish what we do. So and with we are concerned about the violence, I'm happy to discuss the concept of hip hop utilized as a tool. Yeah. So thank you so much to everybody present here, and eager to proceed as Antonio feels.
Yeah, so maybe
Maybe
we would
you would
start.
try to.
I would like to start thinking about public space as something that has been changing so much. And one of the focus, since this is also a part of what we wanted to try to reach out to while thinking about how much public space has been developing and changing, without at the same time trying to focus too much on public space changes just for this moment of pandemic and COVID, because the truth is, public space has been changing way before this pandemic started. And if we think from 2011, 2014 onwards, we can find many movements and activists, demonstrations also being, for instance, growing into the public space. One of them being, for instance, the Black Lives Matters movement. Many of us tend to think about it as a 2020 event, when actually it started in 2013 already. So it's something that has been.
We check in the other room, Manmeet.
No, it was just you. So you were just saying about the Black Lives
Was it just me, or everybody disappeared? Just me. Okay. Exactly. It seems there's been some censoring here. Anyways, so what I wanted to basically conclude with is that many of these discussions on public space, it's just very interesting for me when I go on my Android and the suggestions that Google just gives it to me as something that I would like to probably watch as news. It's very often now publications related to public space, on how the pandemic has changed the public space and how everyone is so aware of this now. But I wanted to bring us back to a time where, before the pandemic, everyone, and mostly if we think about the artistic and cultural communities, were already thinking about this issue. So it's not just the pandemic that made us think about how much the public space has been developing. So maybe I would bring to the conversation here, Manmeet, again, in the sense that one of the lenses through which we are basically trying to engage with public space is understanding, in our current culture, in our contemporary culture, how much the hip-hop scene and culture influenced the way we are actually perceiving our own spaces right now. And many of the liberties that we are nowadays conceiving ourselves and others, how much it changed the relations between people, the liberties in language. It's very interesting for us how this came to be, not just through hip-hop. One has to see this way, of course, because it started before that but most interesting is to think that hip-hop itself is also coming from a line of development of music, many of which is, or it was back in the 50s, 60s, considered a minority kind of music, which basically was using this type of music to gain space in public space, right? So, and reclaiming this space. All the culture, not just the hip-hop itself, but all the culture that comes with it. For instance, the graffiti or way of speech, which is also something that we find more and more in a common use of public space. So now,
Thank you.
please, Manmeet,
Yeah, that was
maybe you would like to elaborate as our
the
MC
point I
in the
wanted to
house.
reach. Actually, the memory I want to refresh in today, because as we talk about history of hip hop, it comes with kind of the idea of unison on the corner of the street for a cipher. People come there with their skills. They work with the resources they have at home, and no matter which caste or which class or which occupation you come from, or what is the age group that you belong to, but hip hop kind of gave foundation for people to meet in a public space, like an outburst from a sound system or just a small boombox on someone's shoulder. But there is a sense of community, even with the arrangements that you make in public, and it becomes like an long time ago. It's something which really fascinated me, gave me the confidence to and a platform to discuss history of hip hop also, and to know from different people what they see that time as the time when the minorities could become the majority by just this meeting point, on in a public space. And um, this comes from 70s, from different big cities or small towns, and it's a culture that could inspire many people with a documentation like a rap video or a concert made, sharing brochures to people and a word of mouth. So the circulation of something happening in a public place becomes almost like a protest to me, and this voice has been spoken since many decades. And as an Indian MC, I do feel the influence of it in a different way in India. But yeah, I feel that this hip hop is something which has many definitions and many dimensions, be it graffiti on a free wall, which I could also see as a culture in Berlin with the time I've spent here. And I've never visited the States, but I always imagine how it was there and what still stays. So this question I would answer when I actually visit the States. But from what I have read, what I have felt from the videos from the older times, coming from hip hop's origin on the streets, I can sense this accumulated artwork in the form of organizing these social meetings, and that's something really powerful, I feel. Yeah, I don't know if this answered you.
At this point, maybe Jaspal, as someone who has been working so much and so closely to hip hop communities as well, and the study also of language, for instance, that how it develops, you being a linguistic and also sociologist in exploring all this this development of hip hop, and how does it help to create new senses of language, and with new languages we create also space, different kind of space, even if it's just on the mind, right? But this lexic, it's something that is very important
thanks very
also to
much.
the development
I would
and
just like to
acquiring
pick
more
up from
different
where
spaces of
Manmeet
expression, right?
has left. Right?
So
We
maybe you would
often
like
understand
to
hip hop
talk us
as
a little bit about your
this
own
kind
work
of
and how did you
celebration,
develop your
right,
work near
of
these communities with hip
marginalized
hop.
communities, and we have the myth of African Americans and Latinx people in New York in the 1970s coming together, appropriating space, and all of that. That is true, and that is beautiful, right? So I love hip hop because of that. And Manmeet has talked about bringing together communities across age, across caste, across race, even at times, and across class, right? But one of the problems in hip hop is it's gendered and bias, and bias about sexuality as well. So in my work in India, for instance, I have met 3 women. One of them is here now, so which is a big honor. But they were all men, and they were all straight men as well, right? So, and this is something I want to point out straight from the outset, that the public space, especially in a place like Delhi or any urban environment in India, is determinantely masculine, right? Even without hip hop, right? So and I arrived there in 2013, and those of you who might remember, in December 2012, there was a terrible crime was committed, which went down in history as a so-called the Delhi rape case, and or the Delhi gang rape, which left the entire population in a state of anxiety, and less women were on the street, and especially after dark, there was no woman to be seen on the street, and it was just men and men and men and men. And of course, in that environment, hip hop had an effect on straight men because they could like sort of mingle and they could meet and everything, but women were almost always excluded. So that is something we need to consider when we kind of try to celebrate hip hop. Is really, it is not bringing together everyone, right? It is bringing together some people. And I would like to read from my forthcoming book just one passage that is part of my epilogue, and that comes from an episode that I think last year or maybe 1.5 years ago. I met with Manmeet in Delhi, and we went to a street cipher in South Delhi, and there were like around 25 young men huddled around them, or big speaker, and they were rapping and they were ciphering and all this, right? So it was a beautiful celebration of coming together in a public space. So at one point, Manmeet came and I came with like a couple of other people. She was the only woman in this space, and there were around 25 men. And she hopped on the beat at one point and dropped some dope freestyle rhymes in English. Yet after a few seconds, some of the other MCs in the cipher started talking to each other. Their chatting on the cipher's perimeter obviously distracted Manmeet, and so she started directly address the nattering MCs in her freestyle rhymes. And I quote, "Listen, brother, you need to see. You got to be silent when another MC speaks. I listen to myself and the brothers that are around me, seducing the masculinity within which I have found me." Right? The young men in the cipher reacted by claiming, "Ooh," anticipating perhaps that this calling out constitutes a disrespect, and would ensue in a verbal battle between Manmeet and the male MC who she was addressing. She, however, finished her rhymes with these 2 lines: "I'm here just to be your sister," and she did that namaste sign, right, and bowed her head. "I listen to your verse and I go crazy." So what she was trying to do here, I think, in my interpretation, was to sort of, call out an MC for interrupting her, not showing her the respect that he would show the other male MCs. But at the same time, also, she wasn't ready to battle. She didn't want to go and battle this other person. And that was, I think, a very, very important moment for me to understand, right? So calling out male hegemony in a space, for instance, but then also not trying to pursue it and making your point, right? But also safeguarding yourself. That was what I got out of this episode that I think Manmeet very elegantly solved. So my point here is really, when we think about subcultures like hip hop in a public space, we need to be critical of it and look at those moments where there is no unity, right? And there is a disruption and there are problems. And I think hip hop has a massive problem with homophobia and sexism.
Thank you, Jaspal. But that's true. I'm surprised. I'm taken aback with the instance you have brought to us. I'm surprised. But yes, it was a very special meeting that day, and it's a good starting point to begin the visible, the most consistently like the continuity of this disparity of gender is something I have also experienced from the beginning of my interaction in public. So yes, hip hop has that as a big feature in itself. So yeah, that's a good point to begin. And of course, Swati, you would have more insight as a female participant in the street culture of engaging with artists, coming from the voices coming from people who which are ignored because of resources that they choose not to prioritize. So they are engaged in the community, and you engage with them to document as an architect, to even work in developmental projects. And yeah, how do you what not to pinpoint your difficulties, but just to share with us how where you find the magic in this process of
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. What things to pick apart there? Yeah. Oh, there are two Antonios. Great.
Yeah. No.
I guess there was a bit of a glitch, but Manmeet should be back with us in a bit.
sorry, to continue.
I was cut, so I'm not
Yes.
sure if she concluded.
Yeah, and how was your time?
Her questions,
And what
so
brought
maybe
you
we
the
can
inspiration
wait just a
to
little bit for
engage
her. In the meantime, basically,
in
Swati,
making rap
I feel
videos with them?
I could
How did the
also
process
bring this
begin?
bridge. I feel like I
Yeah,
know
I also
what
think
Manmeet
about that a
was
lot. And I
saying.
think
Like she's
even
back
today I
with
was
us.
just
She's
thinking
back with
about
us.
how
So
everyone has a different
you can
artistic
conclude.
medium. And even though I'm trained as an architect, if I think about sort of what's my medium, I think it's just people, working with people in, yeah, definitely different ways. I'm just thinking about what you said and what Jaspal said, and completely agree with you, Manmeet, when you talked about hip hop and rap being, this art from the streets. And that's exactly what I saw, what I learned. When I went in, this was in 2017, we created a media parlor. This was a project in Kirki that you're aware of.
Yes.
This was supported by Coach. So when I went in, I didn't know about hip hop and rap, and yeah. So I don't come from that background, and this is what I learned. This is what I saw. The whole point of creating this sort of a media parlor, this sort of a space, was to create this point of pause in the public space, which is the street. And that was because of many reasons. There have been many conflicts, many sort of tensions, racial and regional tensions in the area. And always, and so Coach has been, because they're rooted within Khirki, quite deeply. They've been trying to respond to this, and also they've been trying to answer for years. What can they do? What is their sort of role in this? And so communication became a really important sort of a thing, because Khirki is it's a very culturally rich sort of a place. And wherever there is cultural diversity, there's also conflict. And perhaps then what is needed is communication. And so that's why we sort of set out to create this media parlor. And it was just we started with sort of exchanging media through memory cards, and it just became a sort of a makeshift studio. We started making these DIY sort of music videos, and 90% of the people who would drop by to record their own videos were into rap. And that's when I realized that, I mean, rap is like really, I don't know, really common, or everyone's like really talented in it. Or maybe it's just that medium that people can relate to. And there were people and so of course there were people who just dropped by and spontaneously, they would just come up with a rap, or they already had thought about it earlier. Eve's video is here, in which it's a very spontaneous rap, in which he's reacting to the media parlor we had created, reacting to his experience as a black man walking, through the streets of Turkey. And also there were others who would sort of prepare beforehand, and they would say, oh, this is nice, I'm going to wear something nicer and come again, next week. That sort of a thing. And so there was rap in Bhojpuri, there was rap in Hindi, there was rap in English, there was rap in French, and that's when I really started understanding, why perhaps this isn't a powerful sort of a medium. And also, I've been thinking about street art a lot, and I feel like street art hasn't really picked up the same way in India. And I think my personal hypothesis is just because of access to a spray can. Spray can is like at least 150 to 200 rupees. It's quite expensive, and just because of that, it's a sort of a deterrent. Of course, there is street art of different kinds. Students, especially now with a lot of protests in India over the last few years, there are lots of students. There are lots of sort of like personal graffitis all over the city. But this inculcated sort of art that artists are sort of identified for, I feel like that hasn't really picked up, especially from more marginalized, communities, and simply because of access to a spray can. But hip hop and rap, they are accessible. What you need is basically words, language, and people have appropriated it, have sort of co-opted it in their own way. And I've learned a lot from this process. And I think thinking about what Jaspal said, I think it's very accurate. I think simply because public space is so male dominated, because of that, also, I think rap and hip hop are male dominated. And I think this is also a sort of a gap I see in my work. Because for me, also as a woman, engaging in public space is my sort of battle. I have chosen it because I want to occupy that space. I want to create that space for myself. But I've realized over time that all my work is entirely with men. So being a woman, I have been able to work very little with women, which is I see a huge gap in my work, which is also what I'm trying to perhaps push beyond, go beyond. And I mean, even in the architectural work that we do, which is building community spaces, educational spaces, we're working with community leaders. We're working with the youth who's taking decisions, who is into sort of building the space with their hands. And so that's why they are predominantly men in the streets when it comes to street art of different forms. I mean, I think the reason for that is obvious. So yeah, these are sort of the first thoughts that come to mind, and looking forward to talking more.
Swati, actually, if you could, I would have a question here for you because so as much as it's interesting to think about hip hop as well as one of the frames to look at public space, I would be also interested in such regard from your perspective, not just as a woman, but actually as an architect and a designer as well. So, as someone who is constantly working directly with public space, actually, I found a text from yours which I found very interesting, where you, it's for this website called Architect, or at least the article is called Architecture Disconnected. You might recall this very brief text. So I found your ideas quite interesting in here. If you allow me, I would just read it out loud, this very short paragraph. So you say, architecture today is inherently an elitist profession, which becomes apparent if we look at the percentage of our population that an architect caters to. Apart from public buildings, most architects today work solely for the affluent and middle income groups within India. A staggering 95% of the population does not have access to designers or cannot afford design. Clearly, there is a problem with your profession if most of the construction today is designed and directed not by architects but by contractors in large, planned projects, and local mentions in smaller self-organized areas in Indian cities. Well, I could go on, but I think this is enough to now make you a question. So it's clear that much of your work is community-based. And I also know that, for instance, you developed this modular schools next to riverbanks to engage exactly with populations that usually are set on the sides, are marginalized in societies as well, and to which you are also trying to create a public space for them. Because what is a school if it's not a public space, right? So maybe you want to develop it a bit more into this direction on how you as an architect or
okay, sure. I will try not to take too much time because I've already spoken. But
well,
yeah, I will make this link as well. So yeah, definitely there are public spaces. I think of them more as community spaces because the scale is a bit more intimate then. It's at a neighborhood level, the kind of spaces we build. I also want to quickly respond to the previous conversations on public space and the pandemic, and what you said, Antonio, which is that the pandemic has sort of just revealed these inequalities which have always existed. It's sort of just like visibilized it, for a moment. So especially in India, we know about the mass exodus of the migrant workers from the Indian cities to rural areas as soon as a very strict and a sudden lockdown was announced. So this has the workers have always been there. The spaces they occupy have always been precarious. But I think for at least a few weeks, suddenly the middle income groups and the higher income groups were aware of their presence. And when it comes to public spaces, again, there is a lot of sort of invisible inequality. And when we talk about social distancing, I think social distancing of more, vulnerable groups is missed out. So you were talking about bars and cafes, and there've been very interesting pictures of what are different strategies to distance ourselves when we're eating or dining or just hanging out with friends. But we often forget about vulnerable groups who cannot work from home, whose livelihoods depend on the public space, street vendors, for example. So I think these are the sort of inequalities which the pandemic sort of revealed, but also I think these were forgotten very quickly as well, and these conversations were not had. So coming back to the work that we have been doing, it has been mostly in the informal settlements of Delhi and a few other cities. And informal settlements are self-built, self-organized neighborhoods. Some of them are called slums. And the reason for these sort of self-organized neighborhoods is because there's not adequate housing. There's not adequate affordable housing, so people are creating their own housing, right? Which is great, except for that it is seen as illegal. So the work that we do is working with people in this collective building of the community spaces. So sometimes there are Anganwadis, like daycare centers. Sometimes there are schools, and as you rightly said, these are also community spaces. These are not just educational or health or nutrition sort of spaces. And I think the underlying sort of premise for this work is assertion of right to the city, which is, so not everyone gets to stay in the city. There's a lot of, if we're talking about violence, there's a lot of state-sponsored violence against communities who are considered illegal. And I think in many ways, when people are building their own housing, they're able to come up with a solution, like a self-created solution to a problem which the government is not able to solve. That needs to be validated, that needs to be supported. And creating more of these spaces is a step in that direction. That's how I see it. So yeah, I think there's so many things I want to say, but I'm going to stop here, and please feel free to ask more questions.
You already pointed out quite some interesting points, actually, and thinking at something you said quite at the end of your talk now, bringing the attention back to this violence, which can be layered in many different levels. So we're talking about structural violence, and we're talking about a violence which is imposed into certain communities more than to others. And this violence not always has to be an active one, as we see in so many cases, but also a passive one. And this violence, when I call it passive, it doesn't mean that it's not always so present. And this would lead me more to make a question and bring to the conversation now Naky, which is not on my frame, but yeah, he's here on the other side of the lake. So Naky, I was thinking when I was hearing Swati talking about exactly representations or misrepresentations and invisibilities, which is very often what you deal about in your work, as well as someone who is in Lisbon and engaging directly with public space and try to find spaces of representation of a certain part of history, right? That is directly linked to the history that is represented in those such public spaces, but just partially, right? So when we talk, as Swati is trying to, in a way, creating through collective work, create physical spaces for these communities. On the other hand, for you, for instance, Naky, you're trying to search in the urban areas which exists already. What are the spaces of representation for communities such as, for instance, the many different African communities that one can find in Portugal? So it's well known that Portugal had a massive influence on all that is related to the colonial history of worldwide. However, it's still nowadays something that is so misrepresented when we talk, for instance, about sculpture in public space. So we do praise still nowadays so many of those who achieved those goals of colonialism back in the days. But then what about now? What about the people who are now living those spaces? Where are those people? Where are those voices? And I think your work is exactly trying to reach out to these people and try to find this kind of hidden and many times silenced on purpose or not voices. So maybe you would like to tell us a bit about your own perspective on this.
Maybe you could refresh the page.
We cannot hear you, Naky. Maybe refresh the page. I'm sorry to all. This is, as I said, still a very experimental
Don't worry about
platform.
it. I absolutely love it. If it was
so
perfect,
we're
it's
still
so mundane. This is good.
Find our ways around this tiny bugs.
We hear you.
Hello, can you hear me now?
We hear you.
Let's just wait in the meantime
I don't know.
for Naky to come back to
So
us.
thank you very much, and hello everyone again. Yeah, so I'm dealing with this issue in Portugal for almost 5 years now, talking about the public spaces that are not really representing people who are living in those places, right? So as we know, public spaces are for everyone, but it's a place that is neutral, but at the same time, it's also a place that needs to talk about people who are living in those spaces. So in my work, during the slave trade history or colonial history of Portugal, what I'm trying to do is to give life to those places by naming the places according to the history, the way it was, right? So unfortunately, as Antonio said it, in Portugal, in Lisbon, where I'm living, many of those places have no real names that actually remind the way the history has been, right? So for those who have been to Lisbon, you know, a lot of squares like Praça do Comércio, you know, different places like Rocio, but those places has names, but in the reality, the history regarding the African side only is not represented. It's really, it's completely disappeared, right? So it seems like to be a public space for everyone, but only some people are represented. Only a part of the history is told on those places, and the same also for sculptures. We have sculptures that are not telling the history itself. It's just telling something different or something not complete about the history. Yeah, so the work that is being done, I know it's gonna be like a long way work, because it's not an easy work. It's something that needs to be on at every scale of the politician's sphere, or even social or economical stuff. So it needs to take more time to be before being repaired. But it's important to point this out. It's important just to remind it, because the fact that it's not taught physically maybe an obstacle to be represented, but it's important to remind it this was a part of the history of a country, of a city, and allowing everyone now living on those spaces to see themselves through the names, through the statues that are visible on the places. So It's not only in Portugal, but of course I'm here talking about my work. But at the same moment, we have the same thing like in many countries like mine. I'm originally from Togo, and in our countries as well, this also miss, because the same thing that is happening, for example, in Portugal, where the places are not named, are not representing people, happen also in my country, where there is a misunderstanding of the places that are the public spaces because they are named differently, and then people still get lost in the history because they don't know exactly where to put themselves. They don't recognize themselves with the names that are given. So in the end, we mostly live in places that don't belong to us, even though called public spaces, right? It needs to be a neutral place, actually, a place where I feel safe, but historically, I don't feel safe because I don't see myself in those places, right? So if it's not a place that is livable for me, it's not for me. It's no more a public space. It belongs to those who decide to give a certain name to that place. So it's not livable for me. And at the same moment, I can't I can relate to that place. So it will be difficult for me to even maintain this place. You know what I mean? So it's like I I can't consider this place to be mine. So this is one of the reasons I will point out, saying that this is that brings the violence that's about now. Yeah. So Antonio at the beginning talked about the Black Lives Matter movement. So when public spaces treat names don't represent people or remind something that is not that doesn't bring joy to people, so this can bring this violence we're talking about. People want their voice to be heard. I want their names, the history to be represented at those places. So I'll probably have more time to develop like the African sides, okay, of the public spaces in Africa, in Togo, my country, and also other places, and the way they are represented and the way we take it and how we use them. Okay, so thank you once again, and so yeah.
Thank you, Antonio. I would like to ask you how do you become messenger in a place which you yourself feel violence in? How do you, as an inner city uh, guide of your perspective, your which also includes your history? Uh, you have been in Berlin, you're in Portugal right now, and when you think of home, how do you how do you how do you communicate with homeless people on the street while doing these tours, because they're also closely dealing with the violence in the city? My
Yeah.
interest lies in your conversations with them in public spaces, if you could throw some light on it.
Yeah. So you talk about home. I feel home. I feel home in Portugal. Yeah.
Sure.
I feel really home in Lisbon. It's my city, even though I'm just new here for 7 years almost.
It's not
Um,
me.
so I come to this the first moment, have no representation in the city, have no representation in the streets, have no representation through the monument, through the street names. So this has been one of the motivation I have, thinking like I have to talk about them. I have to deal with this problem. I have to deal with this representation that cannot be ignored in the Portuguese society, being a long-term colonial country. So it needs to be represented. So this is the way everything started, and dealing with those people, going to the neighborhoods where they're living and talking to them, trying to understand better the history, because as I said at the beginning, I'm from Togo. I'm not from a Portuguese former colony. So the history of those people is different from what I would experience here. So the first step I took is to go to them and talk to them and try to understand the history, how they came here, how did they end up here, how their life is, how did they feel in the city. So some of them accepted to share their experience with me. So I understand that they're here for a long time. Their children were born here, but in the end, some of them don't really feel like home. Me, I felt like home at the first moment, but some of them didn't feel like home, even living here for more than 40 years. That, so this is the way I came to that project, and dealing with them, talking to them on the street, and trying to understand their feeling in the city has been also a challenge all the time. I had the chance to talk to even homeless people. And it's hard, it's very hard to listen to them, how how they feel. And talking about homeless people, I'm not talking about only foreigners, but even Portuguese. So it's the same. It's the same for them when you are in a city when you don't feel like welcome, even though being from the city. That. So these are different aspects of the thing regarding the city life where you don't feel yourself.
Thank you, Naky, for your input. I was hearing you out, and I was thinking about a comment that Swati did a few minutes ago when she mentioned that basically this pandemic just brought up to light many of the problems that we already had, right? So it's, I guess, when we think about public spaces problems and all this new rules, let's say, these new ways of behaving in space, or how much or not we are allowed to use it and live on it.
I've been seeing in Lisbon, I've been hijacking some tours in Lisbon in which this young people, they are creating still, they are perpetuating the idea. So they make these tours. So there's massive tourism now, not now because of COVID, but before in Lisbon. So they are using it in order to kind of create these tours to get a little extra bucks, and in which they really highlight the same discovery narrative. And it's so interesting how they are super young. They are like 24 years old, 25, and they talk with such a passion towards these monuments and these street names and these conquistadores. And it's really interesting what you are doing, because you are doing a counter touring, and I think you should really use it as a counter, something that is kind of positioning in a different place, bringing an alternative point of view. And my question to you is really about how do you collaborate with the city then? Because you bring your sort of history, your, for sure, expertise. How do you collaborate not only with scholars in terms of the history of the city, or the stories that didn't stay so visible for the official narratives, but how do you commemorate, for example, which is something that I'm trying to do perhaps, with the statue mans that you have in Rua Augusta, for example, because they are the costumes that they create is statue costumes, and they are over there. How do we collaborate with them for, on the yearly basis, they can transport a different kind of voice? No? I don't know. It's just a question.
Thank you, Márcio. Let's say that it's hard, right? Antonio and you know well how Portugal is regarding that aspect of the thing. I've been trying to collaborate with universities, and Antonio even helped me to collaborate with some schools here. And it's been hard, and Antonio can even testify how even the decision from the school to come up, and the decision from the parents sometimes even to give information to the children to take part of these sort of activities have been. So how do I collaborate? In the reality, I'm trying the best actually to only reach the scholar area. Okay, because one thing is I believe that education is the key. For me, education is the key. Going straight to the city hall and say that, okay, I'm doing a counter tour, I'm proposing this, I know it's gonna be hard. It's gonna be hard because it's going against the narrative that is known by the majority of Portuguese. So coming as a new and proposing something different would be like a sort of war. I'm not going into a war. I'm going into a small step of the education. So this is why I prioritize the scholar area into the schools and allowing children to get to know this history. And then they are also going to be the voices in the future. So there is no collaboration right away with the city halls. I got a chance to be contacted by some universities, some students. I've been to some talks with students who are really interested in knowing about that history. I've been even to the Navy school. That have been one of the hardest, I would say, the hardest collaboration I did.
How so?
Yeah, going to the Navy school here in Portugal, and the Navy school that is, as you know, the discoveries or the era of the discoveries is part of the Navy school history, right? So going there, having a talk with them, it was good. It was very interesting. But yeah, Marcio, I have no real collaboration now with the city hall to organize something and to give light, to bring this history to the light. But it's getting to be like it was going slowly before COVID, unfortunately, but it was going slowly through the media where people were getting to know the history, people interested from any part of the country who would like to have an exchange, who would like to come to the tour, people traveling from the north doing the tour, people from the Algarve coming here and trying to know actually about how things were. So regarding the statues, honestly, it's also another issue. The one in Lagos of the king. Yeah, this is this is a decision that needs to be taken by the government. The one of the discoveries in Belém here that is actually the pride of many Portuguese, talking about the era of the discoveries. Even I don't know if you know that a few days ago there is a minister, I think, or a politician, the Portuguese one, who was promoting this monument to be taken down. So it's been like a huge debate again now on the media, on the mainstream here. So yeah, for the monuments, it already exists, right? So the main concern for me is like, since they exist, it's important to talk about the whole history itself, not just one part of it. Just complete the history, complete the information, saying, okay, this is the discovery. Well, I mean, I always put it into brackets. Okay, so this is the discovery statute. This is what has been done. But during the discoveries, there were also part of the history that was, for example, the slave trade. That was also yeah, a lot of people that have been enslaved who have been exchanged or whatever. It's just needed to be completed. So this is the way I deal with those statues. Yeah, this is the way I deal with them, trying to explain to people that there is not just one side of the history. There is another side of it that is under the carpet that needs to be removed and that needs to be known.
Indeed, Naky. So Thank you again. I'm sorry before I was interrupted. I hope the program will let me speak now. I just wanted to actually create a bridge, and thank you, Márcio, for taking the lead, because what Naky does, I think, and I feel it's directly related to your practices as an artist, as well as you are for years now engaging with public space, and especially also public sculpture in so many aspects. This I would bring actually up this project, to mythologize that history and put it to rest. I think many of these mythologies that we were just talking about, that are basically set in stone around urban spaces, as to create this kind of collective memories, as we should all share the same side of a story, and therefore hiding so many other sides of it. It's something you've been kind of finding ways around this narrative, the so-called official narrative, and doing what, by your own words, shaking down institutions, right? So it's something that you have been so well promoting both in Berlin as in Lisbon, because this was also a project that you took to the two cities. So maybe you would I would like to hear you maybe saying how's your perspective on how contemporary art and artists and other practitioners can also just through their practice relate and bring up these new sides of story. Well, not new at all. Actually, they have always been there. New to, as in bring them to light. This is more what I meant. So if you want to tell us a bit about your most recent practices and also how do you deal with this in such conditions? Because it would, I imagine, be way more difficult now during this pandemic to use public space as places to do some performance when you cannot be there.
One thing is to ask for the permissions.
Maybe you tell us a bit about how's it been this last year.
People together. Another thing is you just guerrilla, no? I think it's you just kind of do it anyways, because I think even in the COVID time you can do it anyways and try to find out other channels, no? Of course, the important part of gathering people, which is very fundamental, I think, in order for us to use or reuse these public spaces. It's kind of missing because of all this pandemic situation, no? But you can still operate within the public space, and I think it's fundamental to do so today. It's a very complex. I think it's a very complex thing. People tend to say to me, or I'm working with this since 10 years now, no? At least. So with this idea of memory, through how does a biological body remember, and how does a collective group remembers, no? So from studies that range from neurosciences to social psychology to post-colonial studies. So, and then one of the really interesting things for me as analogy, let's say, it's like this part of the brain that you have that is called hippocampus, no? Mm-hmm. And this part of the brain is supposed to create long-term memories out of short-term memories, no? So, and if you have a disruption on it, it means that you still kind of remember what was recorded beforehand, but you cannot create new memories. You cannot record new memories, which means that you cannot project a different future. Your future will be projected based on a past that you recorded. And when you bring this hippocampus, the idea of this biological part of your brain, and you bring it to the society. So when you trace where is the social hippocampus, and when you trace where is the disruptions on the social hippocampus. So, and if I look at Portugal, which I'm kind of trying to deal at this point, no, finally. So there's a big disruption on the social hippocampus of the Portuguese society, and which is one of the that can be put beside or it was influenced as well by the idea of public space. No? So in 1940, I don't want to extend too much, but just it's a tiny fragment that I'm trying to work it out at this precise moment. So in 1940, there was this exhibition of the world, of Portuguese world, no? So, and then during the Estado Novo dictatorship, no? So they created all this huge monuments and this huge kind of commemoration towards the discoveries. And the idea that was not a new idea, actually, was actually to integrate, to hijack the identity of Portuguese, to make discoveries as a part of the identity of each Portuguese person, no? So, which means that whenever these stories they enter inside of your autobiography, you tend to defend them. Then in the end of the day, you are defending your patria, no? Your how does it translate? You are
motherland.
Your motherland. Yeah.
Homeland.
You are kind of defending it. Because in the end of the day, symbolically, you are defending your own autobiographic memory, your own identity. But you just didn't understand that you were totally hijacked, that your memories were totally hijacked. They borrowed you false memories and you accept them. And now you perpetuate a fight over something that is just So I think this part is very fundamental to demystify. And for me, there's many ways of doing it, and we can use them all. But one of the really interesting ways is when the second time I was in Cameroon, some friends of mine, they told me that, Márcio, because we were talking about the problematics of the museums, the repatriation of objects, how to, so they told me something that you have to touch, no, as a sort of epistemological. Like a beliefs, not really belief system, because this is always belief. It's always kind of, but very integrated in the culture. If you don't touch iconic objects, they lose all their power and their potential for constantly becoming, which is kind of very integrated in their culture. No, not the preservation value, but the constant becoming of something, of a practice that is growing, no? And we have this, we are completely obsessed by preservation, no? So, and these objects, they meant to create, through preservation, through patrimony, to actually endorse what children, they learn in Portugal since primary school, is that this time of the Portuguese history was a glory time, and we should see it as a glory time. So these Cameroonian friends, they said you need to touch things again, no? So that's why I started to work more precisely on these objects. I thought, exactly, they were talking about the wooden statues, the masks that they need to touch, they need to use them in order for them to become again. And I started to think, I want to appropriate this in a good sense. I want to bring it back, to my own country. And I would like to start touching these objects, these sculptures, these bronze 6 foot tall objects, no? In order to new stories to be told. So of course I cannot do this by myself, and this, of course, comes along with the works that you all are doing with the communities, no? So I think this is a time in which co-authorship, co-ownership, and listening, it becomes fundamental. And for me, and I would love to collaborate with Naky for sure, in the sense of to bring to build spaces for sharing. We have the stages already. As far as I'm concerned, because in my opinion, these objects that are on the public space, they are already stages. They are proof of evidence of the violence. So if we gather people around it to talk, to listen, to share new stories on a regular basis, it's not something for an event. It's something for the next 100 years, 200. You know? It's a practice that it needs to be fed, that it needs to be ongoing. Not an event with a press release and some documentation that proves it then afterward.
Indeed. Thank you, Marcy. Thank you for bringing this topic up, and I think it's something you were saying brought to me this idea of demystifying, right, or demythologizing, using your own term on your artwork, which goes beyond statues and goes beyond space. It deals with language as well, if one thinks, because lexicon, it's also like a type of, when you were saying it, our brains have been hijacked. And it happens actually through public spaces such as schools. And I think everyone agrees here that schools are a base for educating the future, while at least in an Eurocentric completely standpoint of view, at schools, what is taught is not looking to the future, but much more to the past. What were the past glories? What was the past that we achieved? How did we become what we are now? Not what will we become? How can we change it? That there's a whole resistance to it, right? So it's interesting to see how, for instance, I'm sorry, but just trying to bring back hip hop into this whole conversation. For me, it was very surprising when in 2018, for instance, the album "Damn" by Kendrick Lamar received the Pulitzer, right? So I think this represents something already, which is a big change when we think that a rapper for the first time got a prize, which would usually be given to either jazz or classical musicians. So and to accept this kind of language that was how they say criticized by so many people in our societies. Like, we all hear these comments like, how come on, how do the new generations listen to this, and look what the kind of lexicon, look at these words, look at this way of thinking, it's so violent. But is it not the same spirit of critique and, in a way, violence, but through exasperation of being tired of these imposed systems upon us and trying to break them up through words? Is it not what rappers and hip-hoppers do, such as other artists? You would do it, your performance, for instance, Marcy, the same way that Naky does it by bringing up stories that are not here, or, so maybe Jaspal, I don't know if at this point you would also like to show us some of the images or videos that you shared with us in here, because we have been talking around this very hypnotic water bubble, but maybe we want to also circulate a little bit on the space that we basically prepared for this talk. If you want us, Jaspal, for instance, to talk a bit about the images you shared with us and how basically language also was so important, was so in the center of what you did with your project, maybe as a way of rebellion, but also as a way of gaining space and gaining visibility, this so-called visibility we have been talking here in public space. I don't know if you would like to talk to us a bit about this.
Yeah, great. Thanks. Thank you very much. I think, I had so many other ideas, listening to Naky, listening to you, everyone.
Share with us.
But okay, let me talk about the images and see if I can still kind of link back to this idea of remembering, which I found really important, right? So what you can see over here, I would like to point you first to the picture on the bottom left, this over here. This is a video shoot of a video that we produced in Delhi while I was there in 2013, and the person who's holding the camera is Gabriel Dattatreyan, who has just published this amazing book, which I could show you here. It's called The Globally Familiar: Digital Hip Hop, Masculinity, and Urban Space in Delhi. Right, Gabriel Dattatreyan, amazing book. And together he's an anthropologist, and together we started hanging out with, some upcoming rappers. Over here, you can see two rappers, Sanjay and Prabdeep. And on the background, you can see a Nigerian man who was really came from Lagos to Delhi to study film, because the Bollywood industry is so amazing. And interesting thing about this video, I mean, there's so many interesting things I can say about this photo in terms of, the way they are standing, their confident, masculine b-boy stance, right? But I want to point you to the environment in which this video was shot. This is Hozkar's village, which is a 11th, 12th century Muslim village at the outskirts of Old Delhi, in South Delhi now, but the city of Delhi has kind of grown around the village. And this is also what happened to Kirki village, which Swati already talked about. These are urban villages in the sense that they were literally villages that existed before the city sort of embraced the village, right? And so now they are in the urban environment of Delhi. And the interesting thing about Kirki village is, about Hozkar's village, where this is shot, is that we have a lot of old monuments from the 11th, 12th, 13th, 14th century. And they are sort of well preserved. But the important thing about this particular village is that it has become a tourist hotspot. So tourists come to visit Hozkar's village, partly because of the monuments that are well preserved, but more because there's a nightlife over there, right? So you've got restaurants, you've got clubs, you've got bars, and one of the things that is interesting about again coming to gender over here, what I recognized in Hozkar's villages, you have women on the street wearing short skirts, smoking, feeling a bit more like, I guess, free than they would normally do in the rest of Delhi, right? So it is a sort of Western gentrified space, which sort of creates some sort of illusion, I would say, for tourists and for visitors of an authentic old India, right? You would have these monuments, you would have these beautiful buildings and ruins and so on, right? So many rappers decided to come to that place to shoot their videos, right? At that moment in time in 2013, when hip hop became a thing in India. And in many conversations that we had, I asked, why do you want to come there to shoot your videos? And they said, well, first of all, it's safe, right? Because there are so many tourists around and video cameras and mobile phone cameras around. It's not awkward to pose and to go into these areas with a big camera, right? Because it's like the guards and everyone will say like, oh, probably these are tourists. They just want to take some pictures. So at one point gives them a bit of a safe space. But on the other hand, it also shows them as in India, if that makes sense, right? So it marks, these monuments mark them and make them recognizably sort of Indian in that sense, right? So you have a juxtaposition, a coming together of hip hop and India, and that is what they were trying to exploit, right? Because that was something new, and I guess is still something new. A lot of people, when they asked me, what do you do? And I said, oh, I'm writing a book about hip hop in India. They were like, what? But they weren't surprised of me writing a book. They were more surprised of like, hip hop in India, that exists? I can't even believe that. So that sort of excitement of coming together of like a sort of like a Western culture, an African American culture in a place like India was something very surprising that these kids exploited and used, right, as for their sort of performances and so on. Next, right over here, you see a similar image of b-boys practicing on a 14th century monument in Delhi, also in South Delhi called Satpura monument, which is very, very close to to Kirki village that Swati already mentioned. And on this platform of the monument, they were sort of practicing and hanging out. Again, that gave them a bit of a safe space. First of all, it was high up, right? So they could see people coming, and they were kind of like, the Lion King on their rock, right? So they would always be able to see people coming in and out, and they could sort of be free to practice on these monuments. So I think there's an interesting connection here between historical monuments that are being used as tourist attractions, as sort of places that are in some way safe, right? And the production of hip hop practices. And it would be very, very interesting to understand a bit more, also coming from the Portuguese perspective, because you were looking at sort of public spaces as well, and the notion of art, public art happening around those statues, around those big plazas, around the places where tourists also gather, right? So are there like probably people who busk over there, who try to do some magic tricks or whatever, who try to sell you something, right? So I feel that a subculture like hip hop is kind of gravitating to those places that are already loaded with meaning, so that other people come and sort of see, if that makes sense, right? So it's sort of a coming together of places of people around those places in a public space, and I think at that point we have an opportunity of disruption, as Márcio has called it, and Naky has talked about as well, like, you know, like overriding that normal narrative and showing you something maybe slightly different, so that, you know, in the future we can have a different memory of that place. It's not just Christopher Columbus, it's also there's this amazing guitar player or magician around the statue of Christopher Columbus, right? So I'd be really interested to hear more about that as well. Thanks.
Márcio, I don't know if you want to... Oh, sorry.
Yeah, Swati, what do you think about what Jaspal said? Like, how do you look at these historical monuments as an architect, and seeing this additional layer of youth of today reenacting their leadership in front of, in Delhi, especially in Delhi, as you...
Yeah, I was thinking, very interesting what Jaspal was saying, as always. Yeah, so I think because Delhi is littered really with monuments, you know, Delhi is littered with heritage. I say littered because it's not really respected, right? I mean, there's so much of it that it's not really valued. And I think there's a dearth of public spaces, especially public spaces that feel inclusive. So definitely, like India Gate is a great example of inclusive public space. So I was just thinking about how actually these historic monuments are able to provide, you know, that sort of a space, and they're great public spaces. And definitely, I think a lot of youth goes there. So parks and monuments, that's where the youth goes, right? I mean, that's where couples go. That's where young people go. So I think it's also a bit of that. You know, there is a bit of romance that is possible. It gives you that sort of privacy. You know, these spaces can carve out those private spaces for you. I was thinking about that.
What you have engaged in, maybe you could bring some light to that.
Yeah, and I'll come back to this because there's something else specifically here that I wanted to say. I should take down notes. Okay, let's go to my pavilion then.
Okay.
Welcome back, Antonio.
Oh. So yeah, back to the Khirki street, and also I think these urban villages are also Jaspal has been talking about them. They're very interesting spaces, you know, simply because they're more relaxed. You know, the bylaws there, the construction bylaws are a bit more relaxed. The rent is much more affordable. You know, so they absorb people from more different and diverse backgrounds. So there's less of a monoculture here. It's very, very diverse, and I think that's the sort of character of all urban villages in Delhi. So definitely this one in Khirki as well. And I've already spoken about the media parlor. So I'm going to talk about this sort of, this incidental space which was created, which is the Khirki talk show. Can you see this picture here? Okay, so all these pictures with the green screen, The curtain in the background. So yeah, this is where we were sort of
Yes.
recording these music videos. But this Khirki talk show is just sort of an offshoot which emerged, and collaborations are always great. So this was a collaboration with two other artists, Malini and Mahavir, and so they have been bringing out these quarterly newspapers, these neighborhood-based newspapers called Khirki Voice. And so they were talking about how we could just create this sort of incidental space, because the media parlor was already providing this sort of a hub, this sort of pause in the public space that I was talking about. And also what I was saying about communication. So what I think, there's so much sort of suspicion and fear, even though there's a lot of curiosity about people from very different backgrounds than your own. And people are passing by, each other on the street every day, but they're not really talking to each other. And so we were thinking about how we could create this sort of a space for conversations to take place between strangers. And that's how Kirti talk show emerged. So I mean, as the name suggests, it was a very simple talk show. So we were doing this every few weeks, and we just opened up the media parlor to the street, so it became like a spillover space. And of course, in Simi Garewal or Karan Johar style, if you will, we would be quite chai, and so we offered free chai to everyone. So that's always a bit attractive to stop people on the way.
Yeah.
And here, this picture I really like. There was this elderly woman, and there is Eve here, who has also recorded this video that you can see on the left. And he's from Ivory Coast. And I think the kind of interactions which took place were, I think, really, really powerful, even though they were quite transient, quite ephemeral, and people could just speak their mind. And so, in this case, one of the first questions that she asked him was, "Why does your food smell so bad?" Or like, "Why does it smell so strong?" And it was really a question out of innocence and not really any malice, because she has people in her building who are from different African countries. I think I can't remember which ones she had named, but basically she was very curious about how do you cook, and other, I mean, similar sort of questions. And Eve was very, very open about it, and he was like, "Auntie, let me tell you about fermented fish. Let me tell you about the way we cook our food. Let me tell you about all the spices." And that was a very cute moment, because very quickly she started sort of mothering him. She started asking him, why is he still single? Why is he not married yet? And then there were so many similarities which popped up, right? So arranged marriage is a huge similarity between Ivory Coast and India. And so, out of the sort of differences, and these sort of conversations also emerge, I think that's the sort of space that we were hoping to create. So I think these have been my favorite sort of moments.
Lovely.
And I don't know if you want to play a video, if we have time for that. But do we have time to play a video?
We are getting a bit short on time, but I guess you could show us a bit of the video. So each one of us would have to click it separately.
Never mind, right? So you're saying it's better not to.
No. Maybe how long is this video?
We can watch it later. The one on the top, actually, the talk show one, the one on the top. I really like this one because this is talking about Bollywood in Somalia. And we know, so basically Indian movies are very, very famous in Somalia. So I found a lot of what we call South Indian movies. South India is a big sort of a region, but they're typically called South Indian movies. Most of them would be from Tamil Nadu, and they are dubbed in Somalian, and so they were very popular. And also our sort of actors, right? So all the Khans, all Amitabh Bachchan, Mithunda. So these are like household names in Somalia. So when this happened, because Jaspal's friend Abdul, he started this conversation, and he's also very good at Hindi. So immediately people can connect to it when you're speaking their language. And it was a very, very nice conversation. So later, when you have time, please do watch it. And I actually returned to this YouTube channel after a long time because of this talk. And I realized that it's got some 46,000 hits. And I didn't know this video has become really popular with Somalians now. And there's like a whole like list of comments and like very encouraging, very nice sort of comments. So I'm thinking maybe we should have just monetized it at some point. I guess after 10,000 hits, you can get some sort of money, right, from YouTube. So we should have done that, yeah. But maybe
Which
next
could go back to make a movie about this neighborhood.
Exactly, and I think that's what happens because you put something out there and then it takes a life of its own. So I didn't know how these conversations which we are having in Kirki with people who are just passing by, we just pull them in. Who where can relate to it? So someone sitting at like another part of the world finds that really really meaningful, really really powerful. So I think that has been really interesting.
Also, the title of the video, Bollywood in Somalia, is pretty
Right. Yeah.
precise. It's catchy, like a hook I wanted to write. Thank you. Marcio, would you like to take us to your work shared here?
Yeah, sure, of course.
I was actually very curious to make this bridge when Jaspal was talking about the use of monuments in Delhi and how much they became this also shared space for people who are trying to create. But then also, Swati, you added this very interesting point of view where you were basically saying that there's so many parts like this in the city, and many of them kind of like not really people not really paying attention to them. So actually, it's actually a good background, a good stage for people to just take them in and use them as stages, right?
Yeah.
So I was relating this as to Marcio was saying before, also as we already have the stages, right? We already have the stages in the city. We already have these places around us, and it's all about using them. However, what was very interesting for me is like the difference. But between the difference that you were saying, where this was kind of forgotten places, many of them, kind of ruins, and then people would just take them on and they would incorporate them in whatever they're doing. Whereas many times in many times in Western countries, what happens is that we have this kind of sacralized places, right? People cannot have access to it. It's just so difficult to get to it. And Marcio, I think you deal a lot with it. So I just wanted to make this bridge also to ask you about how did you manage to go many times around this spaces where of memorials where they're like almost inaccessible to a way. It's like you cannot touch them, you cannot be near them. You have to have this safety space between you and that sculpture. It's a bit of what I found very different. It's a stage, but you cannot go on it. How did you overcome this?
Yeah. I mean, the most one of the it's not even conceptual or whatever. It was just the kind of drive, It was like you look at this big place and you just imagine how is the view from there. Like so I just want to. And then first time I thought about this, I just climbed the statue to the top, and then I was on top of the.
Die nächste Kolumne erscheint am.
There's
something's playing here.
Yeah,
Die
I
nächste
think
Kolumne
so.
erscheint. Hörst du mich?
Auf
Die
Deutsch.
nächste Kolumne erscheint am 4.
What is happening?
Hörst du mich?
Someone press something.
I think someone played a video, probably not on
Hörst
purpose.
du mich? Ich höre dich gut.
Maybe let's.
No, it sounds like a telephone
Hörst du mich
call.
gut jetzt?
Let's all
She's asking.
refresh the page.
Ja. Also die nächste Kolumne erscheint am 4., also nächsten Donnerstag, die ist schon.
I think it is.
Hello? Wow. This is they are listening to. You can listen to me?
Yeah.
Okay.
A giant mic is following me
Hello?
for some reason. I have a giant.
So are you guys back? I think there was a glitch with this. I still don't know where the German lady comes from. How did that call came to be? Okay, you all refresh the pages now. Yes, I can. And so let's all be near you. I still don't know where Manmeet
Oh,
is.
the German. Okay, that must have been a phone call then.
No worries. Let's
There's really no one close to me.
It's usually a
speaking,
symbol
so
that
it's really-
appears to which we have to gather around. But in this case, because I think everyone's listening to each other, it's fine. You don't. But usually we have to keep close to this microphone so that we can all talk. Anyways, it seems we're getting back in track. So we're all here. Naky and we're missing Naky and Jaspal. I'm sorry for this interruptions again. I'm still wondering where this German lady's voice came from.
Yeah.
Here I'm alone in the room, so it's quite curious. Jaspal is still.
Yeah, I think there's it's. I was telling you about climbing the statue and getting the point of view, and
Márcio,
so this was the first thing,
okay,
you know. You kind of then you are there, and
in the meantime, Márcio,
feel that
starting to talk about,
you are occupying a space of
this connection
symbolic power.
How did you manage to
how
go around this whole
how to explore this, how to mock
distancing
it,
and respect,
how
this
to
over-respect
I don't know, how
for
to
these
develop
places,
work,
but still
artistic work
practicing
that
what you
brings
feel like you have
questions
to,
towards
and challenge these
power,
places.
no? In a time that many people just were saying to me, Márcio,
the videos that
nobody
images
looks at
that you
this
shared here with us, you can
this
give
is
some,
kind of
some
invisible in
examples
the
of that
city,
as well.
and that there was the problem actually, the invisibility of it, the invisibility of these forms of violence. They are there, but they are invisible. People don't look at them anymore, but in the end of the day, they prove the existence of a certain kind of narrative. And they are actually places, shrines of commemoration of this colonial past. No? So some places, of course, most of the works I've been doing are I just go there and do it. I just try to find the timing so I don't get caught, or I have to make up stories, and other times I got the permissions, which is a super bureaucratic
phenomenon.
Exactly. It's like this administration. It's just crazy, and it depends on the place, of course. For example, I did this project, this demythologized that history and put it to rest, which there is a video here. It was a bridge. I was trying to make a bridge between two countries. No, in this case, like was Portugal and Germany. And I was focusing on the Berlin Conference. No, that as far as I understood through the writings and the research I did. It was like something that because of Congo, the problem of Congo, Portugal was saying that it belonged to them because historically they were the first ones to arrive there. Such weird excuses. It's like the same thing as you saying that it's on the Bible, huh? And therefore it's truth. And then I think the Portuguese monarchy at that time, they asked for a conference that actually was organized by Otto von Bismarck, the first German chancellor, in Berlin, and it was coined as a Congo Conference or the Berlin Conference of '84 or '85. So the project starts with this, with the bridge between these two colonial enterprises, and by choosing two monuments, Otto von Bismarck at the Tiergarten in Berlin, and the King Carlos I in Lisbon. So the idea was very simple. I felt I couldn't really work this on my own, so I kind of invited other artists, especially friends and people that I've been working for the last years now, to help me on what can we do with these things? How can we use them as stages to kind of not promote, but to tell different stories, and to promote spaces of listening, let's say. So and then the curious case, and now I'm getting into your question, Antonio. It's really the idea of what can you do and what you cannot do in the public space. So in Berlin, zum Beispiel, we came to the Berlin Senate lady and we asked, what do we need any permissions to do this performance? And she said, are you going to bring a mob of 300 people in protest? We said, no, that's not the point. Are you going to change permanently the space? We said, yeah, as well, no. So she made a couple of questions and then she just said, no, so you don't need any permission. You just go to the place and do whatever you have to do as long as the space is the same space when you leave. But in Lisbon, the case was completely different. And that this is kind of things that I've been making an archive of, because it's interesting to understand the if you understand the bureaucratic system, you as well understand how a society defends patrimony. So in Lisbon, it's so interesting. You needed a permission for sound. If you're going to make some kind of sound, like let's say that somebody's singing rap over there, it's like hip hop music. You need permission for that. Besides, maybe in the next street you don't need it, but beside the monument you need. So you need permission for everything. Like we had to get like I think 10 types of permissions, and one of them, it was permission to touch. Permission to touch, and this was the only permission that we didn't have in the archive that we brought with us, because the police were coming probably, so we were kind of trying to be prepared for that. And the police show up, of course, with the old lady call saying that, Mr. Police, you have to come here right away because they are putting a black box on the head of the king, of her own king, This is super crazy. So the police came and they were trying to understand what is going on. So we told them, I didn't got because I was not the producer. So I thought Irina, she was super producer. So I thought she's in charge of it. She takes care of it. So she showed them all the permissions, etc. And they were saying, but you are touching the statue. Where is the permission for touching? So there was no permission, So the police, they started to make trouble, and I thought, okay, so this is the time, Márcio, that you have to intervene and do the diplomatic work. So I come there and then I ask, what is the problem? Is there any problem going on? Because we have all the permissions, and they said, no, there's one missing. And then I play a card that I had in my pocket for a long time in case the police caught me climbing statues and etc. So I came to him and I said to him, look, you know what? The box that is covering the head of the king is going to come out in a few minutes, and you will check it out and you will see that the monument will be intact, right? The same way we are touching it to open a conversation. We are touching it the same way as when the soccer team of Lisbon, when they win the championship, everybody, like there's a mob of people that go to this huge monument in the center of the city, and they climb it. And there was people falling from it. And we're talking about a monument which 20 meter high. People climb until the top. There was people dying over it, and each year these guys win. There's this apparatus. Police is there to kind of orchestrate the thing, but they don't yeah, they don't stop it. Yeah. So I was telling him, it's pretty much the same thing, you know, when Benfica, this soccer team, wins, it's pretty much the same thing. There's the apparatus going on and suddenly the thing is finished and everything. And he didn't have arguments over it because he thought, yeah, actually, like this. Yes, exactly. So how can one group of people can, in the name of soccer or whatever, they can commemorate in such a kind of modus operandi, and we cannot do it in the same way. So, and by facing this, the police, they just said, okay, blah, 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 blah. So next time, just call us, and they went away. So I think there is always ways that you can contour. I mean, in the places I have been until now. Of course, I was in Brazil doing the same kind of things. I was in many regions in 5 different continents climbing statues, and I had to have a particular, I needed to care for myself in some places because the laws are different. So then it's, yeah.
Correct.
Yeah. Thank you, Márcio. I think, well, we're coming to the end of the time. Actually, we surprised it a bit. I would just like to hear on one last moment, if possible. I see we're struggling a bit. Jaspal is not here. Well, he is, but we cannot see him. I'm not sure. I hope he's at least being able to listen to us. If you are Jaspal, maybe you want to refresh the page so that you might become visible again. It should solve the problem. But to create this, I was actually very curious to ask Naky in his guided tours. Excuse me? You said what, Swati? Swati?
Yes, Antonio.
Can you hear me?
I think it's with me. I would like to.
Should we all go to the meeting point, or?
Can you guys hear me?
Should we all come to the meeting point maybe at this time, as we're reaching the end of the call?
Like I could listen to all of you, but I don't know if I need to be close to this microphone symbol.
I will just conclude what I was trying to say.
Or not. I don't
really collective celebration, which is so strong in a public space.
Okay,
and,
so maybe let's gather around this, because usually when this is on the screen, it means that we have to be around it. So
it's beautiful. It should happen in anti-religious forms as well, or anti.
So as I was saying,
the issue we want to touch base, but yeah.
Say, Manmeet.
Thank you for sharing your views, also, Márcio. Yes.
Yes, we can also do that. Let's all go on the meeting point.
And street performances in Delhi. I mean, in many Indian cities, but specifically Delhi, as you might know, Manmeet. And I think that is also the reason why, many of these hip hop artists and rappers are shooting videos in historic monuments, because it offers a sort of privacy from the eyes of the police. Because we have this, colonial era archaic law called the Dramatic Performances Act, which was enforced by the British to stop Indians from putting up protest performances. And we still have this act, very much sort of active. And Delhi, in any case, has a very strict sort of laws because of perceived threats of terrorism and such. And so because of that, you just don't see street performances. You just don't see busking in our cities. And I think that's also another sort of, sad reality.
No, but it's interesting that there is this space that in some way can be a little bit a fake place, in the sense of it tries to portray something that goes way beyond India, that goes beyond it, but at the same time how to appropriate these spaces and to how to counter, like how these artists are doing. It's really interesting. I never heard nothing like this. You are in these areas, actually you are safe to perform in the public space, being to perform a music video clip, or to perform another way of telling a story, or to perform the identity, or to perform. And this is I think it's very relevant. I'm doing a study now, it's like connected to my work, a project that's called Who Do We Come to Haunt? And the idea is to collect, because I know I've been doing many projects in 5 different continents with different kinds of communities and peoples, not just from the art scene, but from other areas of knowledge. And I've been in contact with them to help me out understanding if this statue phenomena is something of a certain region of it, or if it is a worldwide phenomenon. And many people have been sending me suggestions of monuments, statues, memorials, etc., and how they need to be or decolonized or demythologized, etc., and how they are, like, for example, there is one in Bolivia that they didn't want to tear apart, they didn't want to take it down, because this is their place of protest. So each time there is a protest of the city, each time, like, for example, there's a leak on water of the pipes, they come to protest there. Jointly together around the statue of this conquistador. No, so if they have a problem that is political or any kind of problem, this is the place. So they preserve the place in order to become something else. So, and this is I think this is very powerful, no? And all the ideas that I've been joining in my projects that try to understand how to use these things as stages, how these objects can become stages. It's based on actually this phenomena. It's based on real things that are going on. It's not like ideas that I have suddenly, let's make stages out of this. No, it's actually based on some areas in the world that have been appropriating these spaces to debate, to open discussions. And this is, in Dili, it's like a really very interesting, for me as a case study, of course, on how these places can become places of power, no? For the communities that inhabit them or around them.
The voting power. I wish we could see Jaspal's face right now.
Could you speak, maybe?
Can you speak?
Sorry?
Can Jaspal speak? No, I don't think so.
Jaspal, yeah.
Okay, bounce one.
He's dancing. Wait, maybe he's saying something through dance.
One bounce is yes, 2 bounces is no.
Okay. Yeah, and I informed Jaspal he's trying. Yeah.
Yes. It's strange he's here with us, but yeah. Jaspal, if you can hear us, maybe you can try to refresh the page. I don't know, maybe shut down the whole browser and bring back. In the meantime, I will also just briefly say that we're coming to the end of the time of the conversation. I have to be honest. I would still like to, however, make a very small bridge between what was being said now in this very interesting conversation between Swati and Márcio, and this whole idea on how we can appropriate spaces which are already there and turn them into stages. And it was very interesting what you were saying, Márcio, now about, for instance, giving different uses and different interpretations to something that is already there. So even if it's an icon, and we look at it usually with a certain idea behind our minds of what it represents. What you were just speaking about, for instance, if I'm not wrong, it was Argentina, the space Bolivia? Bolivia, thank you. Bolivia, the space you were talking about, it's like what if we start because this is also a way to see the future to the practices we are trying to practice, to get around. Like I'm imagining, for instance, a future collaboration between you and Naky, and thinking, okay, in Lisbon, how can this be applied? How can we, through performance and through new ways of interpreting those spaces, how can we renew our ways of looking at them? And therefore, how can we renew our ways to relating to them, right? How can we make them not just mean what they were meant to be when they were built, but how can we now use them to talk about all these other issues? And I think in a way, Naky, this is already what you're doing. So if when you're in front of a certain statue, for instance, as I remember participating in one of your guided tours, and you were showing other images of other people that were not represented there, but actually could be or should be.
Naky, no?
This is already like, for me, impossible
sorry.
to look at statues instead of thinking about whoever is sitting on the horse.
So as you said,
because many times I don't even see their faces.
I'm doing.
I'm thinking about the images that you showed. So it's like it's already restructuring the mindset,
images
right?
that can be replaced
so how
in
can
the
we
minds
do
of
it
people,
now at a
just
more
by
participative way?
how you can
that would be
change
enlarged to the
at
whole
least
society?
the idea
I don't know,
of
this is
people
a question.
and
Maybe
seeing a
if you're doing
statue,
it
seeing a
already, because you're doing it
monument
with
that
so many
already exists,
so many communities.
and see like differently. So how can we do it now?
How do you see this going?
Márcio is here. You're all artists. We have rappers. We have an architect. So it's maybe a little bit difficult to do like a permanent thing, like Márcio said. If it's something that is just like just for a while, that's okay. You can have an occupation. But when it's something that is permanent, that's very hard. So I think we can multiply like the different projects, even though we don't have the power to do a permanent thing. We can make like a lot of projects where we produce a lot of things, and that can be visual stuff that we can put on the net. We know that the net has the power. It's also a public space, so we can use other stuff and reach more people through the media. So everyone that will come for the next time in Lisbon, go to the Monument of the Discoveries, will see differently, right? So I think we can use another type of power, the skills we have to reach more people. And I remember, I don't know if Márcio, for example, remember last year there were a performance next to the monuments. Where people represented like the enslaved. Yeah, there were people who represented the enslaved close to the monument of the discoveries. So they want to show that this monument's history that is being told is not complete. People who are on the monuments did this in Africa. So what they did is exactly this. That was something very powerful. I couldn't go there, but I just read it on the media. But it was very powerful. So those people who were maybe traveling and who came there and who saw the monument, they knew that it's about the discoveries, and then saw this performance, probably would go back home and knowing more about the history, right? So as artists or as architect, for example, you can put like a little stuff like in the monument, like building and having a small sign, something, a symbol that can also show people that, okay, there was a type of history here that can be told besides what is commonly known by people. So I think, in my opinion, this is one of the ideas that I can suggest.
Yeah, permanence is I think it's a very interesting concept. No, permanence, the concept. But you know what? It's like we can, because we don't need to fight permanence with permanence. That's the thing. We can do it as well, of course, yes, but we don't need to fight permanence with permanence, because the problem is a permanent problem. Is a problem of permanence. It's like a history that is being permanent for a long time. And for example, if you look at that at some museums in the West Africa, they are trying to deal with permanence. They are trying to deal with the idea of how can a museum rewrite the paradigm, the permanence paradigm, So, like, for example, the National Museum of Mali, like the museum finds fundamental to be adapted to the country and its multicultures, So to break with the tradition of monolithic museums or the palaces of culture that we have here in Europe a lot, So they want to give the museum the size and appearance and complexity of a traditional village while avoiding the scam exoticism of the European holiday club villa, So therefore, like without neglecting the importance of researchers, tourists, intellectuals, etc., the museum finds it crucial to involve its people in the maintenance and the social cultural transformation of their objects. Therefore, they created a system in which a community can come to the museum and they say, okay, we want to borrow this object for commemoration that we have during 1 week. And the museum borrows the objects to them and they use the object and then the object comes back to the museum, which means that they are creating a new way of preserving, a new idea about preservation, a new idea of
treating articles of distinction, maybe.
Yes, and this thing of we don't need to build more monuments that they are meant to endure in time, because we understand that stories, they are all the time coming from different places. We are all the time listening to them, learning to them. I think we have a lot to learn with the idea of oral tradition, and that's where performance can enter, and the performativity, a space. The spaces that you could create are not just representational spaces, but spaces in which things are really debated, find out, So
you see, political. I'm sorry to cut you, Márcio. Jaspal wants to say something. Yeah, and he just texted me. He's not able to talk, and hence I'm speaking for him. But what he brought to my notice is the sculptures, which are like statues of political leaders at this time. In India, BJP continuing to rule and divide us. It's not a habit from the colonizers. It's an ongoing, as you said, permanence of a culture. And if I could sense from a little that he wrote, and also he thanks all of us since we are reaching the end. But really, I also, value this point a lot personally, because it's an ongoing debate in gatherings of communities while the election poll is open. And then after victory, you own that public space and build your own statue while depriving people and destroying the mangroves in the water bodies, not so far from urban cities. So, you kind of build a new road to build a sculpture in the nature to celebrate an ongoing event. So it's not really something ignorable. I think, I don't know if I touch base the right point of BJP, the statues that they are building as a political party in different states in India. But this is something he suggests that we could have a different discussion, and he could share an email with all of us to share his point of view.
That would be super great. Yeah.
Okay, we're just getting started, Antonio. We're just getting started.
But thank you, Jaspal.
I think I'll have to intervene here now. I'm sorry, but the time is getting very long. It's very stretched, and I'm very happy that the conversation was as fluid as I was imagining it to be when we invited all of you. And this is exactly the purpose of us to be here together. I'm really sorry that Jaspal is not able to say his own words. It would be nice to have him here with us. But thank you for that message and to talking through someone else's voice, but still hearing your words. Anyways, if we can continue this debate, which is as big as the concept of a public space. We opened up saying exactly this is a very, very large subject with so many different perspectives reunited and brought together here. It's normal that we would have so much more to share.
On this note, I just want to leave a question for Naky, maybe, and then we can talk later about it. Because you said you wanted to work with education,
and that is exactly
this is one of my biggest aims as well.
Of this project.
But then I was thinking, like in the other day, like, okay, let's redo the curriculum.
It's not going to be permanent.
Let's just try. Maybe in 20 years we can do it. But let's just try. So what we will implement that? Another
happenings
with another
that
vision
will make them
that will be perpetrated for I don't know how many
short
years.
So
with our vision
I hope.
You understand? So what is my question is like, what is the format, even inside of the education? What is the format? Is it another book? The same book that granted permanence to one story now is going to grant permanence to another. You understand? So what is more? As an artist, that's what I'm trying to do. I am trying to do what are the other tools that exist in order for us to, we don't need to use the same systems, but to attain a kind of ongoing results about the fact on the dissemination of new stories, of course. But do we need permanence even in the educational systems? What do we need to make a new book? Is that what we need? It's just a question, that I don't have an answer either. But
the final provocation.
No.
Well, thanks for posing this question. It's important.
Yeah, indeed, there are many open questions to all this, and anyways, Márcio, I'm sorry. Also, it seems that Naky left us for a bit. Probably he's refreshing his page as well. But I will use this opportunity once again to thank all your time, all your questions, all your thoughts. Thank you for sharing all this with us. It's really beautiful to see all these different perspectives coming together. I wouldn't be able also to not give a big thanks to Savi Contemporary to also allowing us this time together and for the contributions. I think I can hear Naky getting stressed with his computer. Naky, we can hear you. I don't know if you can hear us though. I think not. So as a quick end note, I wanted to thank Savi Contemporary and all its team, and especially a big thanks to Abhishek, who helped us put this program together, as well as Juan Pablo Sosa, which was the architect of this digital space that we are basically inhabiting during this conversation.
By the way,
not just to
join us in the circle. We can make this perfect.
But also whoever is going to be watching this conversation,
I love Jaspal.
Streamed and available online from Friday onwards.
Yeah, exactly.
The space will still be online, so everybody can still come in anytime and engage with your videos, your images, the texts that are here, apart from also being able to watch this conversation on stream.
Yeah.